What's your favorite part of spring?
Regent right now has white flowering dogwood trees in bloom. So now I get to walk to grass with a gentle breeze and look at all these flowers.
Blowing in the wind.
Hello, and welcome to this Resilient Lineage podcast, where we reflect on the past, anticipate the future, and discover what God is up to today. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Milo. You like those blooming dogwood trees?
Yeah, it's so nice. It's like the change of season.
Mm-hmm.
Like March 20th was National Ice Cream Day for the first day of spring. So I got free ice cream that day from Dairy Queen.
Wow.
Yeah. Free cone. And then now everything's kind of in bloom. Daffodils, bulbs are popping up, and Regent has a beautiful fountain, and there's the fountain in the middle of the campus surrounded by all these flowering dogwood trees.
I was on campus, a week and a half ago, I guess? Yeah, it's looking good around there. Yeah. Things are starting to pop out. I drive down to Durham once a week, where I'm attending Duke Divinity School, and it's, the drive, it's about a 3-hour drive, and there's a chunk of it that is real. When the fall, it was really beautiful because of all the turning leaves. Mm-hmm. And then I've been paying attention more towards the kind of natural beauty of even the winter beauty. And as I was driving down one winter a few weeks ago, I noticed how everything sort of had a very kind of brown orange hue to it. Like the grass was kind of, places where there was like tall grass had this orange hue. It was like, it's not a palette that you go, oh, that's, exciting, like blooming flowers and stuff. But it had a really, I don't know, I think in the past I wouldn't have seen that. I would have looked past that. And I think one of the things I'm learning to do as I grow older,
yeah, you are, is
pay attention more to things that give clues to unexpected, God's kind of beauty or the funny things that exist within God's creation. Like I remember one time Uncle Gerald was speaking at a church in like the Shiloh area, Ohio area, where I was a preacher at, and at my first church. And if you're wondering, like, who's Uncle Gerald? Well, Gerald Marvel was a pastor of a Vancouver First Church of God in Vancouver, Washington. His daughter, Lori, was on the podcast a few episodes ago. I had a great time with her. And he was a guest speaker at this church in the area I was pastoring. This would have been in the early 2000s. And so I had found out that he was speaking out there. So I took the time I got a hold of the church and I said, hey, heard Gerald Marvel's coming. They were like, yeah. And I said, well, he's my uncle. And they're like, wait, what? And so we got to talking, and I said, if there's anything I could do while he's here to support his visit, like I welcome the opportunity to help with that. Because it was about a 2-hour drive to the airport and things. And they said, well, actually, if you want to drive him back to the airport, that'd be great. And I said, fantastic. So after I think he was speaking at like a missions conference there on some stuff. And so I went to pick him up, and we were driving to the airport, and this is like rural Ohio, very flat. It's not the Northwest, which is where I'm from. And so I didn't have an immediate appreciation for the beauty that was out there. And as we were driving down this road, I'm asking him like some family questions and like pastoral mentorship questions, like, and I can't remember the nature of what I was asking, but I was trying to be as like thoughtful and philosophical and theological as I could be, so I could make the most of this time with Uncle Gerald, who is this sage of pastoral experience and things. And as we're driving, I ask what I think is a very good and provocative question, and he's like, well, and he goes, holy cow, look at the hole in that tree. Can you imagine the squirrel that lives in there? And I remember thinking, how is that relevant to what we're trying to talk about? But like the older I've gotten, I've always thought about that.
Oh my goodness.
Like how much of that is age? Like how much of that is he's actually trying to teach me something in that moment that, here I am in my early 20s. I'm spun up around all of these things, really trying to make sure I get ministry right on the front end of my ministry, that my theology is squared away, that my philosophy of life is good. These kind of foundational pieces that I'm working hard to bolster well. And, he's kind of like I've always kind of taken that as, you know what? Sometimes you just got to pay attention to what God's doing around you. Like that hole in that tree. Can you imagine the size of squirrel that lives in there? I think that's a really good outlook to have at times.
Or bro is just naturally curious.
Or yeah, do you know what I mean? Which is even like, hey, maybe this is the more interesting conversation than this kind of philosophical thing you're wanting to talk about. And I think there's we're actually going to get into a topic today that is very specific to a conversation I had not too long ago. It was actually last fall with one of my professors. And there was a small class. There's like 15 of us, I think, in the class. And there was very discussion oriented. And we were doing what in academia they call now close readings. And she was talking, she said, if anybody wants to do a close reading on the word resilient, please do so, because I cannot stand that word right now. And I was like, ooh, that's a very strong statement. And so after class, I came up to her and I said, you don't like the word resilient? She's like, no, I don't. And I said, well, that's interesting, because my daughter and I have a podcast called Resilient Lydia. And she's like, well, there's reasons. I'll send you some information. So she sent me some information that I looked into, I read, and there was a podcast she suggested I listen to. And what I realized was, we have the website, thisresilientsoul.com, and there's a variety of things I kind of have in my imagination that could kind of peel off of that. Resilient Lineage is one of those things, this podcast that you and I are doing. And what I realized was I had taken the time outside of an initial, how does Webster's define resilient, or the Oxford English Dictionary define resilient? I had taken the time to kind of go like, why are we using that word right now? Because it's a word that is all over the place. Yeah. But it wasn't always this case. And so what we're going to do this episode is we're going to walk through the kind of, where does this word come from? Because it's not a biblical word. It's not a theological word. I should say it that way. And so it doesn't come from the realm of the seminary or the church. It has its roots in other places. Now, we're going to talk to like some passages of scripture that I think capture the heart of what it means to be resilient. But I thought we would, so I wrote a paper for that class, and you and I were talking about episodes, and I think we need to do an episode on this word. And why are we using it in the nature of this podcast title? And how it kind of shapes what we're trying to do with this podcast. And then also, I think there's value in understanding where words come from conceptually, because then it helps us know the limitations of where some of the philosophy that's behind those words, what those limitations could be, or the opportunities that they open up for us. So,
etymology. What's etymology?
I don't
want to search that up. I feel like it could be. Maybe I made someone laugh.
So we're gonna begin with the etymology.
The brief history of the word resilience. All notes provided by Milo Curtis from his paper. Yeah. And I'm kind of like what's the game show? And then there's the lady that goes on the screen.
Vanna White.
I'm Vanna White for this. I'm gonna be like Bean. Okay, I'm just going to go in.
And Wheel of Fortune.
The Wheel of Fortune. Okay. All right, so
the etymology.
Etymology. The term resilience derives actually from the Latin word risilier. Yeah. Yeah. What I said before has nothing to do with this. Okay. And it has the roots in like a Scottish context.
Which is funny because we've been to Scotland.
Yes, we have.
And if you think of resilient people, it's easy to think of the Scots.
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree?
Actually, no. Well, I don't know. Like when I think of the word resilient, like the image that comes to like mind is like a knight.
Okay. Well, yeah. I don't know. I
With, like,
view
a
it as a.
shield.
Have you seen the movie Braveheart?
No.
Okay. That'll change your
He's like
perspective
that
on this.
figures.
Yeah. That's why you're thinking
Uneducated.
not uneducated. But it's like the Scottish people are a very tough people.
Intense.
They're very intense people. And so I think it makes sense that that's kind of the root of this word. Yeah, we need to get you to see Braveheart.
Yes.
Okay, but the verb resile means to draw back or rebound, depicting a return to a previous state. So one way that this word resile was used was to describe like a bow in a bow and arrow, that, you can draw the bow back. You draw the string back, right, and fire off the arrow, but then the bow itself returns to its natural state, right, or its initial state. And so that's kind of one way to think about this as well. So they would talk about the resile of a bow, like how resilient is it, right? How quickly can it return to its form? Because the sooner it gets back to its previous state, then it's ready to be used again as was intended. Okay, so that's kind of the like
etymology.
It finds its history in this among the Scottish people. It has this idea of resile, which is this kind of returning to a previous state. But then in the mid 1800s, the word began, and so the word is not used very often. It's rarely. I couldn't find any writings where it was used to describe people early on. It was used to describe things. Not to say it was never used, but it was predominantly to describe.
It wasn't used as like a characteristic.
Yeah, it wasn't a characteristic. So in the mid 1800s, so you have the Industrial Revolution taking place,
Right.
and you have the birth of like engineering and being able to test the quality of things. Steel, fabricating steel and things made of steel is coming online in a very intense way.
Yeah.
And we sort of have all of these new scientific practices to be able to test the strength of things or the flexibility of things. And so the word begins to kind of moves into the engineering offices of the Industrial Revolution. And so it's a word that's used to describe building materials, particularly as they are able to withstand stress. So how much stress and strain can we put under this before it fatigues, before it wears out, before it can no longer return to its previous state, right?
Yeah.
So the word resilient is shared within that context. In fact, there was a Frenchman named Robert Millet who pioneered the idea of developing like intentionally building things with what he called modulus of resilience. That it was we're engineering things in a way that are resilient. It's not just something is resilient, but they've been designed in a way to be resilient, right? That becomes one of their key characteristics. He was fascinated with how steel could be used to build ships. Because up until that time, how were ships built? Using what?
Steel.
No.
Wood.
Right. So the idea, if you were to like, hey, here's a plate of steel, here's a board, you put those on the water, which one's going to float, which one's going to sink?
Wood's going to float.
Yeah. So it's not initially intuitive that steel is a very good way of, making things that are intended to float on the water. And so there's all of these new practices that are developing around that time. And he actually goes like, wait a minute, I think we can make steel in a way that is resilient, particularly for long voyages, because you have what's driving that. Well, trade with what? With these new continents that we found called North and South America. And so how can we leverage this Industrial Revolution for the purposes of mechanizing the ability to transport goods, to where a ship can pull in, offloaded goods, load goods, and then back out to sea again, right? So that requires some measure of resilience to be able to be under that constant stress and strain on a consistent basis over time. Because wood ships required far more maintenance. Not that steel doesn't, because steel has its own properties, right, that need to be maintained. But it was within that kind of context that how do we create products, things that it's based upon this primary criteria that they be resilient, that they are able to last under a significant amount of stress for extended periods of time. Okay, so you have this word then that was sort of percolating around the world, primarily in the UK with the Scots, and then it's sort of adopted by this idea of building things, and that's where it stays for until the 1970s. It's used to describe things. It's rarely ever used to describe people until the 1970s, and it's in the 1970s that psychologists begin to use the word
and adopt it,
because they are studying Holocaust survivors, people that have come out of this horrible period of time, and they're specifically studying people that, maybe they were at a concentration camp or they went through some horrible, traumatic, stressful situation, but then they're able over time to reintegrate into society and live normal, well-adapted lives. How does that happen? And so they began to study these folks, and what they found, they began to use resilient language, right? Here was somebody that was put under a significant amount of stress and strain. During a set period of time, they come out on the other side of that and they return to their previous state, right? They're able to return back into living within society and culture. And so the word kind of moves then from the engineering spaces and is very much adopted by psychologists who use the word to describe the qualities of a type of people that are unable to navigate incredibly difficult things, but still live healthy and somewhat well-adjusted lives. And ever since then, do you want to read the statistics of kind of around the popularity of all this?
Yeah. So the usage of the term resilience in public discourse saw a tremendous increase from doubling in 1970 to 2010 in that area, and then nearly tripling from 2017 to 2023, which is a pretty big jump. Yeah. So now it's super adopted into traits of, it's, we're going to get into it later. I could just start rambling.
I could say, when I say, growing up, how common was the word resilient for you? Was it a familiar word?
I would say familiar, but we didn't use it every day.
Sure.
But now it's more common than then.
Yeah. I don't ever remember hearing the word growing up.
Really?
Yeah. And, I was born in the 70s. And so it's kind of over a 40-year period, the word slowly begins to pick up steam. And I wasn't raised in a context where I didn't know anybody that went to a psychologist or a counselor. That was kind of something that I started hearing people doing in the 90s. And then obviously since then it's become far more common.
Yeah. And then current statistics indicate that's a substantial interest in resilience. There are over 148 shows on the subject on just Apple Podcasts, and over 30,000 books addressing the word resilient or the resilient as a trait on Amazon.
Yeah, and who knows? That was just me doing a quick search of the amount of podcasts and Amazon, but over 30,000 on Amazon. And it's like over 30,000 because that's what Amazon told me. I don't know if it's 50,000 or 60,000. It was just like over 30,000 titles. And it's like, okay, that's a high enough number for me, which is interesting that this has become a topic that is so poignant for today. Now, I wrote this paper, and we're going to highlight some of the things that I kind of came out of this. We're going to define some things, but kind of coming back to this idea that the word resilient, there is no Hebrew or Greek word.
It's not in the Bible.
Yeah, Old Testament was written in Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic, and then the New Testament was written in Greek. That word does not appear in any of those original languages. So if you have a translation, I was even looking through common translations like NIV or I prefer English Standard Version or New American Standard. Like those, the word resilient is not in any of those common translations. So the question that I began to think of was like, well, but is the idea of being resilient within Scripture? And I think it is. So here's some passages of Scripture that I think capture it.
Yeah, Proverbs 24:16 says, "For the righteous fall 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in times of calamity." Hebrews 10:36 says, "For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised." And then 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 through 18 says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all."
So there's this idea that, you know, there's a strength, there's a capacity we have to go through difficulty and still come out.
Endurance, integrity.
Steadfastness may be another word for that, right? Long suffering. Scriptures talk about those things. So I think the kind of the qualities of what it means to be resilient are certainly found within Scripture, but it isn't a scriptural word. And so I think there's which is always a good kind of gut check, that the language I'm using to describe my life rooted in biblical concepts.
Oh, yeah.
Because if it's not, then the language I'm using to describe my life is rooted in something that has a philosophical and theological bent that is shaping my worldview. So and people may be going, holy cow, this is like way more into the weeds than I thought. Like, can't we just talk about 7 things that'll help you? Like, I think it's good to kind of every now and then kind of camp out and go, the words have impact that shape the framework of how we think about things. So in light of that, when we go to define resilience, there's sort of this kind of two-parter to it. Yeah. So the first part is the ability to survive personal adversity, which is everybody. Everybody's going to go through something. You're going to go through something that's difficult. You're going to go through something that was unanticipated. You're going to go through something that is filled with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And so it's your ability. So part of being resilient is going, I'm going to make my way through this, facing this without choosing to escape from it. Right? And there's kind of 2 ways people try to oftentimes escape from these things. One is they just avoid it altogether, right? They don't face it. So they relinquish their responsibilities and take themselves out of that situation. Or they numb themselves or distract themselves while they're going through the process, right? It's something that is incredibly difficult. And because I don't know how to face the difficulty, I will engage in substance abuse of some kind. I will engage in some kind of activity that takes my mind off of it, disengages me from the process or the people that are involved in the process so that I don't have to think about these things. So both of those are ways that compromise somebody's ability to be resilient, right? So when we talk about it, it's this ability to face the thing that's in front of me and find the path to be able to make my way through it. And a really good book, I don't know if he uses the word resilient, but a really good book on this, if anybody's interested, is a book by Viktor Frankl. And I can't remember the title off the top of my head. Why is this escaping me right now? I can picture the cover in my library of the book. It's a really thin book. Have you read this book? Viktor Frankl was a psychologist who was a Jew that ended up going through the concentration camps. And so he reflects on the people that were able to make it through and the people that weren't able to make it through. Man's pursuit of meaning. Is that it?
Search it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna look this up.
Quick intermission.
I should have looked this up.
It's okay.
Yeah, Man's Search for Meaning. So it's a really good book and kind of wrestles with a lot of these initial concepts. Okay, so one aspect of defining resilience is being able to survive personal adversity, right? I'm not looking to escape from it, and I'm not looking to numb or distract myself as I'm going through it, right? I'm taking on the challenges as they are coming. Okay, the second piece of defining resiliency
is like bouncing back from setbacks.
Yeah.
So maybe this won't come out like right. You might be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I probably don't know what I'm talking about either. But like when we go through seasons of resilience, I think the Lord wants to show us how, like, he wants to show us where to look to when we're going through trials and tribulations. I mean, in James, it says that, like, through everything, have perseverance. Like, there's an aim to where we need to look for. But I think, like, when we come back, it's to be at a better spot than where we were. Does that make sense? Like, resilience is very much like a basketball almost. Like, I'm going to push it down, but it's going to come right back up to where I hit it. Like, it's probably, I mean, depending on how much force, like, it could go higher. But, like, the intent is to keep it where it was. When I think when the trials that God has for us is to push us down so that we can be at a better spot for us.
Yeah.
Not necessarily at this surface level buoyancy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the limitations of that word, to be honest with you, is that the limitations of the word is that it is about returning to
an original place.
It's a previous state, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that needs to be true of our walk with God is that God's desire is not to return you to a previous state. His desire is to mature you to a better state. So that is one of the limitations of the word.
Yeah.
And I think there's and the reason why we're linking this word with our podcast, right? Resilient lineage. Well, when you start talking about lineage, you're talking about the history of something. What are the pieces that have brought us to this place? And one of the things that I see that I don't see happening in a lot of intergenerational conversations is I don't see the conversation about here were the trials, here were the setbacks, here were the difficulties, here were the things that we faced head on and we took them on, and here's how God brought us through on the other side. Or here's some of our family story where we didn't do that.
Yeah.
We took, here's the substance abuse issues we have in our family history. Here are times when we distracted ourselves with pleasure or comfort or whatever other distractions we could get a hold of, workaholism, to not embrace the path, the difficult path that was in front of us for us to move forward. And on my side of the family, both on my Curtis side and Marvel side, we have great examples of that. And we have bad examples of that, of what it looks like to lean into this topic of resiliency. And that is not me casting aspersions on family. That is not me standing in judgment. As much as it is, I think everybody can look at their family tree and go, there's lessons back here for me to learn that can inform how I am bent towards approaching the problems I'm facing today.
Yeah.
And that's why, your mom and I, there's a lot of conversations we have about you and your brother.
Oh.
Ooh.
So.
And some of it is around this, like we see you guys, the way you guys go about making decisions, both good and bad, or things that we see you wanting to avoid, both good and bad. There's things that we do need to avoid, and there's things that we shouldn't avoid, that we look at and we go, that's in us. I remember having that same thought process. I remember wanting to avoid those things, or practicing that kind of procrastination, or practicing that kind of diligence, or being that kind of focused, or that passionate, or that, disinterested, or whatever the case may be. And so some of it is kind of, because I think one of the things that can happen over time with families is, particularly if a family has been healthy, and if a family has been able to enjoy, some measure of success within the terms of how God's kingdom defines success. Right. I want to be really clear on that. Not the way the world does, but the way the kingdom does. That as a result, there's not an investigation of, well, why? What are in fact, we were talking about this over
breakfast,
brunch.
Sure.
Today. How was your omelet, by the way?
Great, actually. I was just about to say that. I was going to say great omelet. Nothing's better than coming home and getting free food. But when it's made from the skills of my father, oh my goodness.
Yeah. But, one of the things we were talking about is like how, you and I attended it was at Regent University, a talk, and the topic was on the topic of covenant. And I've been kind of exhuming lately in my own theology and philosophy of like, where are some of these foundational first principles that have shaped my theology that I'm realizing I'm not seeing in some other folks,
right,
or I'm not seeing in larger trends that are out there. They seem to have different foundations. And one of these things is the idea of covenant. Like we have a relational a tie, an obligation to covenantally, right? And that's in contrast to a bunch of other stuff, which we'll save that'll be another podcast on some of that. But the larger point that I'm getting at is, I think there's a value in families going, okay, how do we dive into these topics to exhume the good foundations or the faulty foundations that have served or not served the family well in building a lineage history that other future generations will build on, right? Because like you guys are benefiting from decisions your mom and I made before you guys were ever brought into the world. And your mom and I benefited from decisions that were made by our parents. And you could keep winding the clock back, right? That there's decisions that were made in the generations that preceded me that have shaped the direction of my life. The question is that a direction that God has for me, or is that a direction that God doesn't have for me? And so understanding, okay, resilient lineage then becomes this, what are the things that I can pull forward into my life from the previous generations that will set me on the course that God has for me. Hopefully, for some folks, that's a big basket full of a lot of great stuff. For other folks, it's not, right? They look at their family history and there might not be a lot there to pull forward because of the way previous generations lived. And you are not in control of that. That is something you don't get a benefit from or be blamed for or any of that kind of stuff. But it's also not going, well, it's all bad. Well, it's probably not all bad. There may be some things back there that you can pull forward. And the beauty of it is you are able to reset for your life some things that will impact future generations. Yeah. Okay, so there's that piece. Now, here's where we're going to kind of get to some
camp out
practical application kind of. Okay, so choosing to be resilient increases your capacity
to A, gain clarity on your core and purpose. Do you want me to say all, or do you just want to camp out one at one?
Let's just do one of these, each one of these. Okay.
So gain clarity on your core and purpose.
Nothing will clarify purpose, your conviction of purpose, more than pain.
Whoa.
So the more painful something is, the deeper your conviction has to be to maintain the course.
Yeah. Example.
Yeah.
Example. First thing that comes to mind, spankings. Okay. Gentle parenting, has its perks. But pain is like a tool.
Pain's a good teacher.
Pain's a good teacher. Like, like, you don't want to get hurt physically. Like, getting hurt physically is no joy. So my parents, if we acted up, first, it was like a warning. Second came the pain.
Okay, well, let's clarify, because I don't want people to think I beat you guys.
You didn't beat us.
Right. So your mom and I believed that spanking was like the nuclear option in child rearing, right? And so we would spank for one of three reasons. One reason was if there was imminent danger, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're 3 years old and you keep running into the road after I tell you to stop, mm-hmm. what am I going to do? I'm going to spank you, right? Yeah. Because I want to create some... You're not listening. And so, and you might not being bad, you just might not understand the consequences, or you're having fun, or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to create some place of pain to help you avoid imminent physical danger.
Right.
That was reason number one. The second reason why we would spank you is in the case of outright rebellion. That if I would tell you to do something, and every parent knows the look in their child's eyes when the child goes, I've heard you, I understand you, and I'm doing my own thing. And
I never gave that look.
Yeah, you did. Oh. Both you and your brother did from time to time. Because guess what? Every child does that. And every parent can recognize that look in their child. And parents, I guarantee there's other people that can recognize that look in your child as well. So if you think you're the only one that can see that spirit of rebellion in your child, then you're misinformed. And then the third reason why we would spank you, I didn't know you were going to bring this up, or else I wouldn't take the time to go through all these things. But I don't want people to think we just beat you. The third reason why we would spank you is if you outright lied to us. Mm-hmm. So, because lying is a violation of trust. Like if you could have done something that was completely wrong, but if you told the truth, you probably wouldn't get a spanking. But if you lied about it, well, that's a violation of trust. And so we created pain in those arenas because pain is a
good teacher,
is an effective teacher.
Yeah.
So where were you going with? So just the idea that
to gain clarity of your core and purpose.
Yeah.
Growing up, I don't think about my core and purpose as a kid of where I want to do with my life, other than I want to move to New York and make designer dresses when I'm 3 because I've styled my Barbies accordingly. Like obeying my parents was the purpose. That was instilled in Andrew and I. So to be resilient. That was the pain we had.
Yeah.
It's not like we had financial issues. It's not that we had, we had guilt. That's a certain kind of pain, but that's not physical pain.
Well, pain can come in a variety of ways, right? And so the thing is that, pain will help you gain clarity on what those core convictions and purposes are. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's one piece. So choosing to be resilient, which people have to make that choice. I'm going to do this no matter what, right? I'm going to go through this thing. And it's not just going through the thing, it's also factoring in the time and resources on the other side to recover. Mm. That's part of the resiliency piece.
Right.
Okay. The second thing is that there's an intimate understanding of your non-negotiables that will strengthen your integrity. Mm. What you think are your non-negotiables might not actually be your non-negotiables, right? And so oftentimes those things aren't discovered until you go through something that's incredibly difficult. Like what are the things that actually matter most to you? Mm. And bringing clarity to those, these are the things that have to be true in my life, no matter what. And it turns out I think really our non-negotiables end up being a very short list of things. But trials and temptations and struggles will bring clarity to those things. Where I get concerned is when people think that they're the that inconveniences or discomforting things is not equal to trials and struggles. Just because you've been made uncomfortable or you've been made to be discomforted doesn't necessarily mean you're going through something hard. It may mean you've put your expectations in the wrong place. It may mean that your value system is all kinds of wrong. And in fact, one of the things that we did at the longest time, it kind of gotten out of the habit since I've been in the service. But one of the things that we would do early on is your mom and I as a couple, we wanted to get out of the country every 5 years. Personally, I tried to get out of the country every 2 years to go to a place where we had missionaries that we knew that were serving. And these were in austere, difficult places. By visiting those places, you sort of begin to get clarity about what hard actually is, what difficulty actually looks like, what to live with a significant amount of constraints actually means. And so once you kind of get clarity on that, it is, some of this is voluntarily putting yourself in situations to experience that, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think has that point been made?
Yes.
Okay. Next.
Third, right? Yeah. Use challenges as a catalyst to grow and to learn.
Yeah. So yeah,
it's really easy to kind of go through these trials and these pains and be like, I don't think there's any hope with this. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to grow. Because sometimes it might be within your, how you got there, or sometimes you don't know how you got there, right? With just how life goes.
Yeah.
But I think there's a beauty in everything that the Lord pulls us and stretches us so that we have a deeper understanding of the life He's called us to.
Well, and there's a value in stepping back and reflecting in a non-judgmental way, which is really important. Of what are my lessons? What am I taking away from this? What do I need to own? What do I not need to own? And so, there was your mom, every couple fights. So if your mom and I would get in, this is particularly early on, which I mean, in the first maybe 8 years of our marriage, 8 to 10 years of our marriage, when we would get into an argument or a fight with one another, we would try to, get through it and whatever it is, but then there would always try to find a time to where we could kind of sit down and go okay, why was that a fight? Why was that a disagreement? And not for the purposes of figuring out who was right or who was wrong, or figuring out who won or who lost the argument.
Right.
But for the purposes of kind of deconstructing it and going, what does this tell us about who we are, about the values that we felt were under threat, or the trust that we felt was being violated, or whatever it is, right? And now to do that requires a tremendous amount of trust. That if I'm going to take the time to sit down with somebody and sort of deconstruct this thing for the purposes of learning and growing, I have to trust that those that are around me I'm walking through this with share that same desire.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case, right? So again, that shapes the non-negotiables you have. I have to have people in my life that will help me understand these things, not be dismissive of them or harp in a judgmental way that's condescending and demoralizing. But who are those people that will come along me, help me look at something that's been in my past and sort of really deconstruct it in a way that will allow me to see the lessons I need to learn so I can grow and learn and mature through that because I went through that.
Yeah.
And then the last.
Yeah. Wisely hold the tension between living with strength and flexibility. When my dad said that, he immediately, because I'm sure I had a face of yeah, totally. I agree with that. And then he'd be like, so what do you think that means? And I'm like, so you tell me. And he uses the example of the bamboo. You share it. You share it.
Well, so bamboo is oftentimes used to illustrate resilience because it's, when you think of a bamboo tree, it's very flexible. Like when you see the wind come through, right? It blows. I had the chance when last year I visited Japan with the Navy sent us out there to do some training. And so there was this one day where the guys I was with, shout out to Brandon and Rob, they decided, not me, to go on a run up a hill for like 6 miles or something like that. It was stupid long. And I was not in any sort of PT shape to be able to do something like that. But we did it nonetheless, right? So we go up this hill, and part of it was we were running through this bamboo forest. And it was beautiful. But if you were to look at any single one of them, I don't think anybody would go like, that is a very strong plant, right? Because of its ability to flex to the wind. Now, what's fascinating is the tensile strength, which is a way of engineering to measure the strength of something. The tensile strength of bamboo is greater than steel. And so here's this thing that is both flexible yet incredibly strong. So this is where, particularly in Asia, you'll see them use a lot of bamboo for like scaffolding or for staging things for building and stuff, because of its ability to be incredibly lightweight, very flexible, so you can shape it into a variety of forms, but be very, very, very strong. And so the idea of resilience is it carries both of those dynamics, which I think a lot of people are realizing they need to develop in their life, because sometimes we have a tendency to lean one way or the other. I'm incredibly flexible, which means I don't have a lot of strength, or I have a lot of strength, but I'm very rigid, right? Yeah. I'm not flexible. And so, and I think there's the type of wisdom that God wants to provide us, that the Holy Spirit wants to give us, is that type of wisdom that figures out how to do both. It's like one way physically to think about it is think of the physical person, like who's very fit, like you can just tell they're a strong individual. They can do a lot of things, but they're also incredibly flexible, right? Like if you were to say, can you put your palms on the ground? They can do that as well as lift something that's very, very heavy. Yeah. So think about that as it relates to mind, body, and soul. How could I shape my mind in a way that is both flexible, adaptive, responsive to the environment I'm in, while maintaining strength? Without compromise, right? How could I do that spiritually? What does it look like to know what my convictions are, to know what my non-negotiables are, while at the same time discover what maybe the expression of those things are? So I hold to these things with strength, but the expression of those things may flex. That's where the flexibility may come. Yeah. And then I just gave the physical illustration of that. So I think there's a dynamic to this that, again, coming back to kind of the larger idea of resilient lineage being, what can I learn from my family history? Because the blood that flowed through them is the same blood that flows through me. What can I learn in my family history that shapes that kind of resiliency in me? What are things I need to get rid of where in our family history, and everybody has that, there wasn't much resiliency. There wasn't that sort of, commitment to the core purpose, kingdom purpose that God has for us, being focused on a set of non-negotiables that we will always hang on to, being willing to deconstruct experiences for the purposes of growing and learning from those things, being able to maintain the tension wisely between strength and flexibility. The beauty of it is this, like nobody has a great family story, a perfect family story. Right. Jesus didn't even have a perfect family story, right? If you look at the most
unconventional way. And his genealogy.
If you look at his genealogy, there's a lot of mess. There's a lot of things that aren't right. Yet, despite that, where do Mary and Joseph find themselves? They find themselves in a way to be able to usher in the Son of God because of who they were, not because of who their family was. Right. And so, or despite their family, or in some ways the good things because of their family. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of go, okay, well, what is that for me? What are the things that I want to take forward into the generations that are going to follow me.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah. So to recap, choosing to be resilient increases your capacity to gain clarity on your core and purpose, intimately understand the non-negotiable that strengthen your integrity, use challenges as a catalyst to grow and learn, and wisely hold the tension between living with strength and flexibility.
If you are signed up for our newsletter, you have an email that has all of these notes in it.
Yeah. Even if you know us.
Even if you know us. If you aren't signed up for the newsletter, what you can do is you can find a link that will say click here and it'll take you to these show notes. But wouldn't it be easier if that was just put into your email? Right. So listen, we want you to sign up for the newsletter.
Yes.
Because we want to help you.
Because I was talking to someone this morning.
Yeah?
I don't want to call him out, but he knows who he is. And he was like, I was thinking about the newsletter, but I see you every Sunday. So I get to talk to the creator about this. And I was like, okay, so I don't care. Like, you should still do this.
Well, it's a both and, right? There can be a both and. So sign up for the newsletter. Visit thisresilientsoul.com. You'll see the little link up in the right-hand corner, or if you scroll down the page, you'll be able to see that. You can also share, rate, follow, review this podcast. By doing that, you're going to help us get the traction that we need and let others know about what they can expect by listening to this podcast. You can follow me on Instagram or X. Just look for Milo Curtis, Facebook as well.
And then you can follow me at Olivia Curtis on Facebook or Olivia.Grace_28 on Instagram. If you guys reach out to us at hello@thisresilientsoul.com, we will get back to you. If you guys have any ideas for any series, episodes you want, literally just drop it in there or DM us. We will get back to you.
I spoke at an event last fall, and somebody emailed us through our...
No way.
hello@thisresilientsoul. And it actually, remember, we listened to that book?
Yeah.
And so it led to a great opportunity that we're going to take advantage moving forward. So thank you all for listening. God bless, and be well.